What is the most corrupt thing you've ever experienced? M's guy, in the days before the internet. I got fired by a private ambulance company for using the wrong pen to fill out Medicaid forms after a run. I used a ballpoint instead of the soft tip flare pens and was immediately sacked by the owner. A few years later, I found out he was imprisoned for Medicaid fraud. Turns out the soft tip pens he provided didn't go through all the carbon copies on the forms. And he was changing the bottom sheet to show more miles and services for each ambulance run, before sending them to the state. The day I used the ballpoint was for a very long ride. And cost him a lot of fraudulent money. That's why he was so infuriated. I won't go into details. But I work for a municipality as a fairly low-level employee. I've been offered bribes on a number of occasions to let things slide here and there. All very tempting, but I like my job too much to risk it for $20 or so. Long story short, the biggest bribe I have been offered is $1,000. I reported it to my supervisor and his response was, "Duck dude, why didn't you take it?" I sure as hell would have. But we filed an official report. Didn't go anywhere as I didn't know the name of the people. Makes me wonder what else is going on that I don't know about. When I was getting food at food banks, the employees and volunteers would take the best quality, tastiest food for themselves or their friends. Realizing that I was the only one who wasn't stealing from the company. Used to work in the department. And over time I noticed that things were going missing. Replace a bunch of monitors in a lab. Then a few weeks later notice all the old ones are back. What happened to the ones I just delivered? We don't have nearly as many of something in stock as it says on our shipping receipt. And why are we always out of service kits for the copy machines? Yeah. All of that was going on eBay or Craigslist or somewhere else. Didn't realize it for years. Maybe I'm just really oblivious. But the whole department was in on this. My wife and I bought a house. The landlord wanted access to the apartment we were living in the meantime so he could renovate it and sell it at an exorbitant price. We told him multiple times that we were going to keep and maintain the apartment to the end of our lease, only had 23 days left. And that we were going to clean it. etc. Like normal. He didn't like that. So he performed an illegal lockout. Then charged us a $750 cleaning fee saying we left it a mess. The entire $1,900 rent for the last month and attempted to keep our $1,900 security deposit. What he didn't know is I'm not one of these uninformed foreigners he's used to threatening. I live in Bensonhurst, which has a heavy Russian, Pole, Italian and Chinese immigrant population. I know the law damn well. So I went to the apartment and recorded him in the act of locking me out. I'm big black dude, so I was showing restraint by not manhandling him since I'd immediately be found at fault. Then I gathered every ounce of proof I could. Built a case and sued his ass. We also hit him with 311 hazard reports and he got charged a shit ton for repairs. Lead, it was one spot in the closet. But he was still charged. After about 2 months of back and forth, he acquiesced and settled out of court, giving us back the full last month and full security without charging us the cleaning fee. Know the law, people. Don't let anyone try to pull one over on you. Had a friend who taught at a ritzy private school. Parents there pretty much bought grades. Raffle for a jet ski at a local carnival sponsoring the local volunteer fire adept. When they called the winner of the jet ski, I was standing right behind the guy who drew the ticket. When the ticket was drawn, he called a completely different name than was on the ticket. Winner was a close friend of the fire chief. Not sure how much I've experienced this, but gerrymandering is the most blatantly corrupt thing I can think of. It's not under the table. It's in plain daylight. And somehow they get away with it unquestioned. I guess I'm lucky, because this wasn't that bad. My friend and I were traveling from one shitty former Soviet republic to another by train. We noticed that a more direct route would save us money, but involved travel through a third country for which we had no visas. It's only trouble if we get caught. We decided. We got caught checking tickets and passports. The kid in the sheety polyester uniform and crooked hat spotted the missing visas immediately. He said problem. Big problem, and took our passports away. Time passed. After a while, the kid returned with his boss, an older version of himself in the same uniform, but nearly passed out, drunk and smeared with grease. He slumped against the door, his eyes alternately swiveling and closing, as Nabadajavasilikistan rattled by the train windows. I think I tried to make my case that we had made an honest mistake. Finally, my traveling companion opened her wallet and pulled out the entire sheaf of soft currency she'd forgotten to convert, and literally slammed the wad into Lieutenant Borovica's gut. He ducked off. Junior gave us our passports back and may have given us a warning. Sad thing was, they could only spend that soft currency in the country we were just coming from, which they were not citizens of. I hope they found a way to have a good time with it. I attended a very small, very religious middle school for about 9 years, and was ruthlessly bullied for the final 3. I was singled out by one girl who would constantly insult my hair, skin color, family, and anything I made the mistake of admitting I enjoyed. She even went as far as saying that the only way my mother was able to afford to send me to school was by being a whore. I was 12 at the time. I didn't even know what a whore was. I told my teachers and the principal, who said they would assess the situation and help out, which did a whole load of jack shit. They would stand next to our table at lunch, and when the bully, obviously, didn't say anything to me, would tell me she seemed polite to you today. I didn't hear anything wrong. I was even encouraged to invite her to my goddamn birthday party. Anyway, this all culminated at graduation, where my bully was awarded a special diploma and a scholarship to an equally religious private high school for exemplifying what it means to be a good Christian. I later learned that her family donated a large chunk of money to the school to help keep it running, which is definitely why everyone turned a blind eye to how horrible she was. I used to work for a global pharmaceuticals company. My boss was a mid-level manager, making pretty good money, low 6 figures. And this was 25 years ago. It wasn't enough, though. We had a company contracted to build some software for us. Somehow, they were paid about $4 million and never delivered working software. Every time we questioned this, we were blocked by the boss. It turns out that he was a silent partner in the software company. When he jumped ship, they promoted him to a manager position in another country. His successor immediately terminated the contract with the software company. Within 24 hours, the company was dissolved and all records disappeared. My ex-boss worked there for a few more years, until it was clear that he was still lining his pockets with company money. He was then given the opportunity to pursue his career outside of the organization. Sometimes, white-collar crime does pay pretty ducking well. Was at a polling place in a school where as a project in college we were doing a student voting project, letting elementary kids cast a vote for president. At this school the kids were voting at booths near where the actual voters were voting. It was pretty dead at the time I was there until this one woman comes in with a stack of voter registration cards. She hugged the poll workers and they laughed it up. She then voted for at least 6 people who were not present to cast their own vote. She signed their name on the registrar and everything. Went back and forth from the registrar to the booth each time to cast a new ballot under someone else's name. As this was playing out I walked over to the election judge and in a nice way asked WTF. He told me, oh, it's okay. We know her and most of those are her family members. I went outside, dialed 411 on my cell phone. Smartphones were not a thing then, and got a hold of the county elections department and they said they'd look into it. About 10 minutes later the election judge got a call on his flip phone and said exactly what he said to me and then hung up. Nothing ever came of it. And the more people I told, the more people kept replying, well, if she knew the people then it's okay. I worked at a small photography bar scenes when I was 18. The owner and her sister were shady with everything. We didn't have real tickets, just random pre-printed papers that we filled manually. Neither me or the other girl working there had a contract. It was the first years of the economical crisis in Spain. So most people stuck with whatever job you could get. Anyway, I was going through old company emails in a really slow day to entertain myself. I started to see weird emails from an attorney about a lost trial. I went through the mails until I found the first one and read them chronologically. Seems like the owner had been using that email for personal sheet back in time. And she ducking tried to fake a robbery in her house. They set it up as if someone had broke into the house via the garage. And they were found guilty of faking it as the door was forced from the inside. So corrupt and dumb, I would say. My rapist was considered to have a strong testimony because he took a polygraph test. He was also allowed to go to vacation in Hawaii before being brought in. Thanks, Ohio. I was working for the government and lots of people would take half days off and still get paid for the whole day. My boss would often come dress in his golf outfit only to disappear after lunch. One day we had a small emergency and the big boss realized that I was the only one there and I couldn't do anything because I didn't have access to the computers. Smaller boss had to come back, still wearing his golf attire, to help. Of course nothing happened to him. Still in the government. The boss retired early and then got hired as a consultant for a private firm that he had coincidentally given contracts through the years. So he came back working for the same place but now getting paid in double. Had a restaurant I own broken into. The cops told me that because I didn't have a security alarm permit, they wouldn't be even coming. I went on the city website to find that the security alarm permit is just you enter your store address and phone number and you pay $150 a year. A construction company I worked for, buy a ton of extra material. Bill the customer all of it, showing the receipts. Return the massive amount of extra. Cover it up with fraudulent bookkeeping. Every job. Every time. As for personally witnessed, it's fairly tame I suppose. I worked for a company that built machine parts and certain parts were plastic but they could be upgraded to their urethane equivalents for a pretty substantial upcharge. We always made these parts with plastic regardless of what the customers ordered. Bought insulin in America. Police officers blocking my way until I gave them money. In Egypt. It was 10 years ago. I was the last one of our group coming back from some viewing platform at the Pyramid of Saqqara and they just blocked the stairs and extended their hands in front of me. I had to bribe them to be able to descend the stairs and go back to the group. When you think these people are there to protect the tourists, it's kinda baffling. At least they were cheap, a few euros each. I watched an underqualified person who was ABD, completed a PhD but had not defended it, with 0 publications and no postdoc get a tenure track job at a major Canadian university. They were a gay ethnic minority from a good Ivy League PhD program, so the hiring committee rejected at least 80 more qualified applicants. I was a grad student observer on the committee but to this day I think it was so corrupt. When I was a senior in high school, we had a senior party after graduation and our parent group had raised tens of thousands of dollars for a raffle at the end of the party. The person in charge of the raffle had a son in my grade. Their foreign exchange student won a brand new MacBook Pro and her son won the grand prize of $1,500 cash. I walked out with a $5 gift card to an ice cream shop that had gone under a few weeks prior. Duck that sheet. I was pulled over, arrested, and charged with a DWI by a cop I declined to date about a month earlier. Plot twist, I was sober. I represented myself in court and, surprise, the charges were dropped. It was when I worked for a temp agency. It was not one big issue, but many little problems that worked on each other. They required a urine test, handled in-house, for all employees. They would ask if the prospective employee could pass a drug test. If they said no or were uncertain, the temp agency would then bypass the test and mark off as if they had passed. After being hired, the temp agency was outright abusive. If you didn't show up to be sent home, it would be considered a no-call no-show. The waiting area was outside. Lots of fun in winter. If you called in sick or left work due to being sick, the temp agency would remove your name from the list for 2-3 weeks. This included if you had a doctor's note. The agency and the company that hired the agency would hire temps to full-time after a 90-day trial period if they worked enough hours. However, the temp agency would remove people from the list for prolonged periods of time, so this limit was never met and you'd have to start over. The agency was also responsible for training the employees. This training consisted of them walking around with a contract telling people to hurry up and sign this. When trying to read what I was signing, I was threatened with being sent home and thus taken off the list. For a few months, the bathrooms were padlocked shut. You had to go to the office and check out the key to use it. Only one person was allowed in the bathroom at a time. The bathrooms were designed to handle about 4 people each at a time. If you injured yourself at work, your name would be taken off the list, but as before, you still had to show up. One lady threw out her bag. They didn't report it and said she either had to work or be fired. They put her name on the list, effectively forcing an injured person to work. When she complained about not being able to lift anything, they had her stand outside holding a sign that said "Now hiring." This was second shift, 4 PM to 12 AM, and winter, well below freezing. The building's location was in a very small industrial park surrounded by fields, windy and no traffic. Last I heard, she had pressed charges for abusive treatment. If anyone complained about the shitty treatment, the temp agency would say, "I guess we can start drug testing everyone." Most employees would shut up at that point due to their hiring practices. While in my last few weeks there, one of the temp agency employees, not the temps but the agency's actual employee, was fired for embezzlement. Another unceremoniously quit. It was predicted that one was stealing too. One of the remaining employees applied for the now vacant position. She was told that she didn't meet the requirements for the job. The agency hired someone new, and then they told the lady who wanted the job to train the new person for that job. She rightly walked off. Whenever someone asks me about that place, I tell them it is a shithole and to only apply if they physically cannot acquire any other means of income. My university makes us buy a public speaking textbook, published by the university, and tear rubrics out of it. Your grades are penalized if you don't turn in the rubric torn out of the book for the teacher to mark your grade on. This ensures that you can't resell your book, so the next class has to buy brand new books. All the while, the university is putting up signs about why you should recycle. Not big compared to some others here, but I'm still salty about it. Edit. Update. I've just received an email to inform me that access to the building with the computer labs running expensive software we're required to use for homework is a privilege, not a guaranteed right. An old friend of mine got a job working for a church-based charity. They would accept household donations and sell them in a thrift store they had set up to raise funds for the needy. His job was to drive around in a cube van, pick up the donated items and deliver them to the charity. He openly bragged about picking the best items for himself and would drop them off at his house before delivering the rest of the items to the charity. I called him out on it and told him it was a bad idea, seeing as his cousin and 2 aunts worked there, and put in a good word for him to get hired. That's when he told me that they've been doing the same thing for years. He told me his aunts wouldn't even keep most what they stole. Rather, they would sell the items at garage sales, and that it was okay because that's how they make their money. To make matters worse, they were paid in cash so they could keep collecting welfare. Pure trash, and needless to say, I have nothing to do with them anymore. Once while working as a night shift cashier at a store, my supervisor randomly told me to take a break and that he'd take over the register for me. I was just happy to sit down and went to the break room while he made small talk with a customer he seemed to know. I thought nothing of it and finished my shift as usual. The next day, the store manager called me into his office and fired me. I was flabbergasted. He said that I gave a 99% discount on over $150 worth of merchandise last night. I told him that I didn't, and couldn't without supervisor approval anyway. They had to enter their unique code to give discounts. I was fired because it was my register and my supervisor kept his job. I used to work at a non-profit that provided financial education to middle school and high school students, achievement of juniors. The VP, my direct supervisor, was using money from our sponsors, the city schools and No Child Left Behind, to pay for his girlfriend's apartment that was around the corner from our office. Somehow he was altering our records so that no one would notice. Side note, although this sounds like bullshit, his wife had cancer. I work for a non-profit faith-based drug alcohol rehab. Turns out that in 2018 our founder and president CEO was skimming money from the company to, among other things, buy clothes and jewelry for his girlfriend. His wife must have been pissed when she found out. He had also ostensibly been clean for the better part of 30 years but was also getting high. And he's an ordained minister with his own church. I was assaulted, threatened with death, and physically and emotionally harmed by another person. The court found him guilty and ordered him to pay €750 to the state and €10 to me. That didn't even begin to cover the costs of gas spent as a result of the attack. I've never trusted the justice system since. Especially as I still freeze up every few months with nightmarish recollection what if daydreams. Edit, just as an addition, we had extensive proof of his volatile personality, a breach of contract, and threats. None of it was taken seriously. I dated a coworker and at some point it turned out she had a boyfriend. Apparently she just had a rough time with him and I just so happened to be kind of attractive to her and gave her the attention she's been missing out. After I found out and backed off, the two suddenly got closer again and she told me she couldn't believe that she was dumb enough to almost leave that wonderful man for me. To which I replied something along the lines of, and I can't believe I was dumb enough to ignore the red flags. We never exchanged a single word after that. On my next shift I got called into my boss's office. He told me that she claimed I was stalking and threatening her, and that she was trembling in fear because we had the same shift that day. She even cried in front of him. I was completely baffled and started to tell him what happened. I even showed him the my chat and call logs. He actually believed me, but still had to fire me since she was working full-time for about a year and a half, while I've only worked there for 3 months, and in part-time. Economically, keeping her was the right thing to do, but morally, yuck. I considered suing her for those claims, but in the end I didn't. The whole crew ignored her best they could after that. Karma, I guess.